Nestled among the towering peaks and rugged landscapes, these roads are located in perilous locations along the edges of cliffs and through treacherous mountain terrains. So for today's video, we're going to explore the 15 most terrifying mountain roads on Earth. Starting with number 15, the 99 Bend Road to Heaven. Located in central China at Tiananmen Mountain National Park, the 99 Bend Road to Heaven is exactly what it sounds like, a road with 99 super sharp bends. These hairpin turns bring you up 11 kilometers until you reach Heaven Gate, which is a natural rock arch that's believed to be the link between the gods and the mortal world. And while the steep drop means one wrong move could end in disaster, it still is a beautiful roadway. Number 14. Los Caracoles Pass. So if you're looking to drive through one of the coolest border crossings on the planet, none are quite like Los Caracoles Pass. Now it's nicknamed the Snail's Pass, as it connects a remote section of the Andes mountain range between Chile and Argentina. Climbing to an elevation of about 3.2 kilometers, its hairpin turns and total lack of safety barriers make it dangerous in the best of conditions. As such, it's usually closed thanks to snow in the wintertime. Number 13. The Stelvio Pass. Built between 1820 and 1825 by the Austrian Empire, and now located in what is modern-day Italy, the Stelvio Pass is one of the highest mountain passes in the Eastern Alps. While beautifully paved, it does consist of 75 hairpin turns and is extremely steep at parts, making it great places for experienced drivers, but more than a bit dangerous for newbies. However, if you decide to visit, go in the summer, as it's often closed due to icy conditions and bad weather in the wintertime. Number 12. The Hana Highway. The tropical Hawaiian island of Maui is known for its incredible beaches and beautiful weather, although Hana Highway is an often forgotten feature of this beautiful island. Consisting of Hawaii Routes 36 and 360, it's a winding, narrow roadway that passes over 59 bridges, of which 46 are only one lane wide. Worse still, Route 36 is relatively easy to drive on. 360 is notorious for going through steep mountain passes that are often difficult to navigate and prone to mudslides. So while a trip along the highway is pretty beautiful, enter at your own risk. Number 11. The Guoliang Tunnel. Before the Guoliang Tunnel's construction, China's Guoliang village could only be reached through a rough mountain path. This cut the villagers off from the outside world, and so in 1972 the decision was made to increase access by creating a road. In an incredible story of teamwork and determination, a group of villagers sold their livestock to raise money to buy tools and materials, and soon 13 of them got to work. Using mostly hammers and chisels, they hand-carved the road into the side of a mountain, sometimes at a rate of just 1 meter every 3 days. After 5 years of struggling and the death of one villager, they finished the project. And while the 1.2-kilometer route measures in at just 4 meters at its widest point and is rather dangerous, it still is an impressive feat. Number 10. State Road D915. Turkey is a beautiful place to travel to, and one of its most iconic scenic routes is State Road D915. It's built at the behest of the Russian army in 1916. This order was made after this army captured the coastal city of Trabzon during the First World War. You see, after capturing the city, they noticed it was pretty difficult to move into Turkey's interior, so they decided that a roadway should be built. Not wanting to do this work themselves, they decided to conscript hundreds of locals who together built 106 kilometers of gravel roads using nothing but hand tools. Since then, the road has been expanded to its current length of 179 kilometers, and while most of it is pretty safe, there's a stretch between Of and Bayburt that's anything but. While just 5.1 kilometers in length, this part of the road is built into the imposing Sognali Mountain. It's made of gravel and wide enough to fit 1.5 cars at most points. The portion zigzags for 29 hairpin turns at a steep gradient. Just one wrong move here can cause you to fall right off the edge, and unsurprisingly, this has caused it to be closed during the winter time for about 6 months in order to prevent icy slips, mudslides, and avalanches. Now, unfortunately, this hasn't been enough to stop tragedy from happening. For example, in 2019, a journalist fell off a cliff while on duty on the route. He was reportedly covering a story on road construction along the road when an avalanche hit, carrying him down the mountain. After a 14-day search that consisted of hundreds of rescuers and caused 2 casualties, his body was ultimately found about 1 kilometer away from where he was when the avalanche hit. So, while traveling on this road may be a cool experience in the summertime, I would stay far away in the winter. Number 9. The Zojila Pass. High up in the Himalayas, with the Dras Basin on one side and the Kashmir Basin on the other, sits an incredible Indian road known as the Zojila Pass. Stretching for 9 kilometers at about 3,500 meters above sea level, it's a narrow single-lane route that's little more than a dirt track in many parts. Roughly translating to the Mountain Pass of Blizzards in English, it's known for its awful weather, as it's generally closed for half of the year because of the severity of the local snowfall. In fact, the snow is so bad here that it takes 2 full months to clear the road, which is usually occurring in the late spring. If that wasn't bad enough, the pass's highest point is at such a great altitude that travelers are encouraged to not linger long so they don't run out of oxygen. Yet despite being rather remote and inaccessible, the Zojila Pass has a rather storied history. During the First Kashmir War, Zojila was seized by Gilgit rebels in their 1948 campaign to capture Ladakh. The pass was recaptured by Indian forces on November 1st of that year in an assault codenamed Operation Bison, and the battle proved to be historic. That's because in a rather surprise move, Indian forces brought up tanks to the pass, and at the time, it was the highest altitude tank battle in world history. Beyond this historical footnote, the pass has received attention from the Indian government. In a bid to make it more accessible year-round, a tunnel was announced in January of 2018. Known as the Zojila Tunnel. The idea is it will be a 14-kilometer-long, 2-lane route located just below the pass that cuts right into the mountain. While it will cost just north of $1 billion to complete, it's expected to cut the travel time across Zojila from an excruciating 3+ hours to just 15 minutes, making travel in the region far safer and less dependent on the weather. It will also be unlike most roads due to its status as a smart tunnel, as it will be equipped with CCTV, radio control, an uninterrupted power supply, and ventilation. As such, once this tunnel is complete, the old Zojila Pass will likely be more or less abandoned. Number 8. The Freedom Trail. Throughout World War II, the Nazis were combated by a concerted anti-fascist resistance movement. And while thousands of tales of bravery ranging from the liberation of Yugoslavia by resistance fighters or the capture of Mussolini by communist partisans have received quite a bit of recognition, one tale that's not often talked about is the Freedom Trail. In essence, during the thick of the war, the Royal Air Force would send pilots over France in order to bomb military targets. Oftentimes, they would get shot down. While many of the men were arrested and sent to prisoner of war camps, thousands managed to evade capture, and it was these airmen alongside escaping Jews who would be housed in the homes of the resistance. Generally speaking, the penalty for housing Jews or airmen was death, and citizens could get massive bounties for spying on and reporting on their neighbors. This put these families at great risk, yet despite the dangers, they would often serve as stopping points to get these people out of continental Europe. While several escape routes existed across central France and the Mediterranean, many would empty out to the Freedom Trail, or Chemin de Liberté in French. Running through the Pyrenees on the border between Spain and France, it was often one of the last routes to take before making it to the Atlantic. Traveling along this mountain road was dangerous. After all, not only did the terrain make movement very difficult, but the entire area was routinely patrolled by both the German military and the Vichy-run paramilitary force known as La Milice. This made it imperative that escapees avoid German checkpoints and stay hidden. Yet unfortunately, this wasn't always enough. That's because while a total of 33,000 people managed to escape along the entirety of the Pyrenees chain between 1940 and 1944, more than 100 didn't make it, being either arrested or shot after being caught in ambushes. Yet despite these dangers, the route proved instrumental in saving the lives of thousands during some of the darkest days in European history. If you're interested in experiencing the route for yourself, it's open to the public and can be enjoyed on a guided trek. While it generally takes a few days to complete the route, it is a beautiful path, a rewarding physical challenge and far less dangerous than it was in the past, making it a great choice if you're looking for an active getaway. Moving on to number 7, the 52 Tunnel Road. When you think of World War I, chances are that the trench warfare along the fronts in Belgium or France is what comes to mind. However, one of the most forgotten about battlefields in the campaign was in the northeast of Italy. High up in the Dolomites, the allied country of Italy went toe-to-toe with Austria, which was in league with Germany as a member of the Central Powers. Most of the war was fought along mountainous terrain, and it stayed that way until the dying days of the war, where Austria made great advances to the Piave River, coming within a stone's throw of Venice. Yet until that point, Italy reinforced its mountainous position by creating a series of roads, the most famous of which was the 52 Tunnel Road. The 6.5-kilometer-long donkey path took 600 workers 10 months to build and was completed in November of 1917. Built on Mount Vesubio, it was essentially a route for soldiers to be launched out to various rocky outcrops along the front, many to their death. Unlike on most other World War I-era battlefields, the soldiers here lived like moles, burrowing into mountain caves and crevices. They spent much of their days in cold, treacherous conditions as they attempted to use long-range guns and artillery to destroy enemy positions, with this road facilitating much of their combat activity. Wide enough to fit 2 mules and their baggage, many of the tunnels are quite long in order to get through the rock face, with one of the most notable being the 19th, because in addition to being the longest at 320 meters, it has a helical layout with 4 hairpin bends inside a gigantic rock tower. In any case, while 52 Tunnel Road was out of the range of Austrian artillery for much of the war, travel across it was dangerous, and its steep average slope of 12% and up to 22% at parts made journeys on it anything but easy. Unlike many other routes, it was also open year-round, although winter travel on it certainly carried a fair share of risks. However, despite proving to be useful for a number of months, the Italians ultimately abandoned it during the retreat in the face of the Austrian advance. Once the war was over, Italy regained control of the mountain, and while mountain biking on the trail is strictly forbidden due to several fatal accidents, it is still open to hikers. Number 6. The Burma Road. World War II was one of the most destructive conflicts in human history, and one of the routes that facilitated much of the fighting in Asia was the Burma Road. Running from what was then the British colony of Burma to southwest China, it was built between 1937 and 1939 in order to transport supplies to China during the Second Sino-Japanese War. Built using a workforce of over 200,000 Burmese and Chinese laborers, creating this 1,150-kilometer route was an immense challenge. Cutting through terrain that includes mountains and rainforests, traveling the route was grueling. However, it proved vital in order to circumvent Japan's blockage of China, and soon became even more important during World War II. That's because after the Chinese lost several important ports to Japan, the route became one of the few that Britain could use to support China's war effort against the Axis. Now, generally speaking, supplies would be shipped from an American port like San Francisco, land at the modern-day city of Yangon, and then move by rail to the start of the trail in order to be driven to China by truck. While this process was tedious, it proved very much necessary and continued until the Japanese invasion of Burma in 1942. After Japan invaded, they closed down the road, forcing the Allies to resupply China by airlift. It was only after the recapture of Burma by the Allies in 1944 that the road reopened, and the first trucks sent to resupply China arrived in 1945, once again making this road essential. However, after the war ended, the Burma Road fell into disuse, and while parts of it continue to be visible today, it has more or less been forgotten. However, it's worth noting that there are several Hollywood movies from the early 1940s that centered around the road, with these including A Yank on the Burma Road and Bombs Over Burma, and even afterwards a limited amount of media continued to be produced. So if you want to get a taste for this historic roadway, it may be worth watching an old film or two. Oh yeah, it's also worth noting that there's some misinformation online surrounding the road. That's because there's a rather crazy-looking mountain road known as the 24 Zig Road that's often attributed as being part of the Burma Road. However, the reality is that this Chinese road was an entirely separate route that would often be used after supplies had been finished crossing the Burma Road. Yet, despite being incorrect, the error continues to persist to this day. Number 5. The Sichuan-Tibet Highway. For years, the tensions between China and Tibet have been sky-high, as China has time and time again claimed Tibet as part of China. And while these disputes have made things icy between the two countries, there is nonetheless a long, albeit extremely dangerous road that links the two. Known as the Sichuan-Tibet Highway, it begins in Chengdu, which is the capital of the province of Sichuan, and continues on to the Tibetan capital of Lhasa. Unlike most highways, the Sichuan-Tibet Highway actually consists of two different roads, a northern route and a southern route. Of the two, the southern route is the most dangerous. Going more or less in a straight line between Chengdu and Lhasa, it covers a distance of nearly 2,200 kilometers. According to reports, it's the more scenic and varied of the two, and it's known for its winding turns, numerous switchbacks, hairpin bends, and above all, beautiful views. However, to experience this, you have to put yourself through quite a lot. First and foremost, the altitude changes from a relatively manageable 500 meters in Chengdu to over 4,200 meters at the Mount Zojila Pass, which is the highest part of the road, making altitude sickness likely. Worse still, much of it is in pretty rough condition. That's because while a recent facelift has turned it from a mostly dirt road into one with a lot of asphalt, it can be hard to maintain the road in more remote areas. As such, the more serious danger now is the recurrent landslides and mudslides, which can happen with little notice and block parts of the road. The northern route, on the other hand, is a little bit tamer. Stretching for nearly 2,300 kilometers, it's known for its pristine scenery and outstanding mountain views, and reaches an altitude of more than 4,000 meters at various points. Beyond the location, though, what sets this road apart is the fact that it's almost completely covered with black asphalt, and due to it being the less direct route between China and Tibet, sees a lot less traffic. As a result, the road tends to be in better condition, making for a safer ride. However, despite being quite beautiful, the highway has had its fair share of tragedies. It's believed that over 1,000 workers died during construction of the highway between 1950 and 1954, and every year it continues to claim lives. So unless you're a very competent driver, you may not want to brave this route without the help of a guide. Number 4. The Amalfi Coast Road. Of all the roads on this list, the one that's perhaps the most traveled on by tourists is the Amalfi Coast Road, stretching for 50 kilometers between the Italian city of Sorrento and the town of Amalfi. An ancient version of the road apparently existed during the times of the Romans. However, a modern rendition of the road first got legs in June of 1807. That's because in 1806, Joseph Bonaparte, who was the older brother of the far more famous Napoleon Bonaparte, was crowned King of Naples. After being crowned, he promptly inspected the area, and after seeing the situation at hand, decided that a road needed to be built from Naples to Amalfi. This road was completed in 1854 under King Ferdinand II, and ever since, this small road has continuously become more and more popular. You see, while it was originally meant to be used by locals, in recent years tourists have inundated the area. Since it is the only way to drive into the towns of the Amalfi Coast, everything from taxi cabs to large tourist buses can be found along the route. Since there's only one lane each way, traffic jams are common, and given the hairpin turns and lack of guardrails at many points, it takes extremely precise driving. When traffic accidents do inevitably happen, they cause massive delays, and it can take many hours for repair crews to come in and find debris to be cleared from the road. As a result, many simply opt to drive on a scooter or hire a ride to make the travel easier. Alternatively, you can also come during the off-season to beat some of the summer traffic and crowds, as much of the Amalfi Coast is absolutely rammed at the height of summer. Yet despite the cliffside terrain and congestion, most people would say a trip here is totally worth it. After all, Amalfi is easily one of the most beautiful towns in southeast Italy. As its picturesque church, beautiful buildings, and fantastic beach, it makes it a great place to visit for the day. If the Amalfi Coast Road ain't for you, a trip to Sorrento is still worth it, as the city is in close proximity to historic sites such as Pompeii and Herculaneum, beautiful islands such as Ischia and Capri, and the incredible, frankly underrated city of Naples. As such, a trip to this area of Italy is a must for any traveler. Number 3. Skipper's Canyon Road. Like many places, New Zealand has had its fair share of gold rushes, one of which occurred at Skipper's Canyon. The story goes that in November of 1862, Thomas Arthur and Harry Redfern were prospecting in the area when they discovered about 4 ounces of gold in the space of just 3 hours. Rather than keep their discoveries a secret, they widely publicized the area, and soon miners began to descend on the canyon in droves. Soon the prospecting became so lucrative that the Shotover River that passes through the canyon received the nickname the richest river in the world, and eventually a few lucky miners made significant fortunes plying their trade in the valley. However, like many gold rushes, the whole thing was short-lived. By the 1870s, the gold began to dry up, and by 1900, the valley was almost completely abandoned. Yet while the riches didn't last forever, what's continued to serve the travelers to this very day is the local road. Known simply as Skipper's Canyon Road, the route was not around for much of the gold rush. You see, a number of steep and dangerous routes had existed before the 1860s, but these proved to be unsafe, and oftentimes those who tried to take pack horses lost them and their supplies. In order to make access to the Skipper's Canyon safer and allow for the transport of heavy machinery to help the gold miners, the decision was made to build a proper road. It was surveyed in 1883, and after 7 years of work at the hands of 4 contractors, the road was mostly completed in 1890. While the situation has certainly improved with the addition of the new road, taking it is still somewhat of a nightmare. After all, it was meant to be used by pack horses, and it's just barely wide enough to be driven on with modern vehicles. It stretches for about 17.5 kilometers. This route has a speed limit of just 15 kph. However, despite the slow speeds, it's not safe for newbies. First and foremost, there are very steep drop-offs with no guardrails, leaving absolutely no room for error. To make matters worse, there are a lot of twists and turns and nothing but gravel, making a ride through the route rather rocky. In fact, it's so dangerous that most rental cars will not insure travelers who cross the road, meaning that you could be on the hook for thousands if you damage the car along the road. So, as you'd like to experience the Skipper Canyon Road for yourself, well, I'd suggest hiring out a guide and driver so you don't have to worry as much about safety or insurance during your travels. Number 2. The Karakorum Highway. Now, generally speaking, long highways don't generate much excitement. However, a very niche segment of adventure tourists have only good things to say about Karakorum Highway. It's also known as the China-Pakistan Friendship Highway. The 1,300-kilometer-long route is considered to be the highest paved international road in the world. It runs through the disputed region of Kashmir through to China's Xinjiang region, which, for those of you up to date with current events, is the area of China with the very much oppressed Uyghur Muslim minority. In centuries past, it formed part of the Silk Road, but its modern-day rendition broke ground in 1959, and officially it opened to the public in 1978. Despite cutting through remote mountainous regions, most of it is open year-round, save for the Zojila Pass. Located at an elevation of nearly 5,000 meters, heavy snows and harsh conditions have historically shut it down for months on end. And while the COVID-19 shut it down for a 3-year period, it was finally reopened to what supposedly would be year-round traffic earlier this year as part of China's Belt and Road Initiative. In any case, the Zojila Pass is one of just many reasons why this road is extremely dangerous. The construction itself killed about 800 Pakistani workers and 200 Chinese workers, and every year the road's sheer cliffs, lack of barriers, hairpin turns, and risk of rock falls, landslides, and avalanches lead to several deaths. In fact, the approximately 45 years since it's been open, a grand total of 1,000 people have died. Yet despite all this danger, the road has become a massive tourist attraction. It's often pegged as the 8th wonder of the world. A trip down this highway is apparently surreal, as its mountain facades and glaciers are better than practically any other equivalent on the planet. If you decide that a trip down this road is something in your wheelhouse, be ready for quite the trek. First and foremost, the road's altitude has caused many to become sick, meaning you should probably take precautions. That is to say, it may be wise to make frequent stops as you get higher up in order to acclimatize your body. It is also not a road meant to be traveled quickly, as most people who have done it recommend spending at least 10 days on the route in order to hit some of the villages and natural sights. So, as long as you have the time and money to put this trip together, a ride down this rather dangerous road would certainly be worth it. Number 1. The North Yungas Road. Located in Bolivia, the North Yungas Road connects the country's high-altitude capital city of La Paz to the country's low-lying Yungas region in the Amazon. It was partially built by the Paraguayan prisoners captured during the failed Chaco War in the 1930s. The end result of their efforts was a roadway that's absolutely immense. While the entire thing is over 36 kilometers long, the most terrifying part is its ascent. That's because it climbs from an altitude of 3,600 meters to 4,600 meters at La Cumbre Pass, and once this stretch is complete, it makes a steep descent down to the town of Choroico. Dropping steeply for over 3,600 meters, it is one of the world's longest stretches of continuous downhill road. While it's pretty cool enough in its own right, what gave North Yungas a spot on this list is the extreme danger. You see, North Yungas Road was built onto the side of a cliff face. This made building it pretty difficult, and as a result, for most parts of the path, the builders only made it 3 meters wide. In other words, barely wide enough to fit one vehicle. This makes its twists and turns pretty difficult in the best of conditions, but the reality is that good conditions are rare on North Yungas Road. That's because it has to contend with the warmth, the rain, and humid winds of the Amazon. It's not uncommon for mudslides, tumbling rocks, and small waterfalls to spring up on the roadway. And due to the lack of guardrails, being hit by one of these things can easily lead you and your vehicle tumbling off the face of the mountain. Even if you manage to avoid being whacked, the poor visibility and lack of asphalt makes it very difficult to navigate safely. Misfortune on the road peaked in the 1990s and 2000s. During this time period, an average of 26 vehicles plummeted over the edge each year, and estimates placed the annual death toll at somewhere between 200 and 300 people. This eventually began to give the road worldwide notoriety, and over time, tourists began to flock over to it in order to try to drive it themselves. Well, unsurprisingly, this didn't make the death toll any lighter, and eventually it became such a big problem that the Bolivian government decided to step in and build a new road. Completed in 2009, this newly paved two-lane highway has safely diverted most vehicle traffic off the most deadly portion, leaving the original curving narrow dirt route to guided bike tours and individual drivers. This has made riding on the dangerous part of the road far safer, and it's created a thriving tourism industry, as several mountain biking and ATV companies now offer organized rides. Starting at the beginning of the road in La Paz, the ride usually begins in the morning and takes between 6 to 7 hours to complete, depending on the exact starting point. While prices may vary depending on the equipment and guides, the experience generally costs anywhere from $100 to $300, and by many accounts, riding down the road is not all that hard, so long as you don't try to do any crazy tricks or stunts. As such, so long as you have a decent skill level and go on a day with good weather, riding down North Yungas Road is a pretty cool idea. I'll see you guys next time. Thank you to our channel members.